All right, welcome to episode 135 of Extinctionati. And with me today, I have little Englander, LE, and we are going to try to talk about snakes and serpents and apocalyptic collapses of civilizations and a bit about internal anarchist relations in groups of anarchists who try to work together on the internet. So, what do you think about those topics, Ellie?
Well, it's all kind of quite ironic, but it's always the way, isn't it? It's circles within circles. So I guess you could say that you always end up having disagreements in organizations, and there always has to be usually a power center that rules by authority or tries to take power. So I don't know. I don't believe in any kind of democracy. I don't think that. I think that's false in anything, any kind of human organization of society. So I suppose things always collapse and burn. But yeah, I find this situation rather ironic. I don't know what your thoughts are. Yeah, I'm not. I'm not here to. I don't have any agenda. But this is a strange situation. But yeah, a lot of irony. I don't know. What can you
Yeah, I
say?
would say, like Sophie always says, we are in collapse already. So this kind of thing is, it's just to get used to it as soon as possible because things are not going to get any more quiet or calm or anything. I think so. Make a quick jump over to something I've been researching since the last episode. Because last week I asked Lambda, the Google AI, about how it was with the ice age ending and agriculture and civilization starting, and we had a kind of nice 2 hour discussion about that back and forth between human and computer. And it turned out when I researched the thing further after the show, it turns out there's been some pretty nice revelations on Netflix and on YouTube and on Joe Rogan and stuff about a previous civilization during the Ice Age collapsing after a meteor impact 12,800 years ago. And that we had a civilization, people were cultivating the land uh, during the Ice Age, and then you have this huge meteor caused fires and extinctions of large animals and floods everywhere, like the floods you read about in the Bible and stuff. And it basically forced people to go underground and to hide out for, I think, 1,000 years during the Younger Dryas, and then reemerge afterwards and build very impressive temples and megaliths and Giuseppe Tepe or whatever it's called in Turkey, which you always talked about, and then go back to farming and to agriculture like nothing happened, or so basically our historians today, the mainstream, they talk about agriculture starting like 10,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East. But according to these other guys, it started like maybe 20,000 years ago, and but all of those sites are washed away by rising ocean after the ice age ice melted. Yeah, so that's what I've been doing for the past week, researching that kind of stuff. And So it's fun, because we talk a lot about collapse in this group in Extinctionati, and all of a sudden we have two collapses. One collapse 13,000 years ago, a collapse of civilization, and then we are heading straight into another one right now. So I'll shut up for a while now.
So this was a collapse that hasn't been recognised by modern history, but I think I've heard of this before. If you could reference who the people were that were talking about that, that'd be interesting. The scientists that Joe Rogan was interviewing. Quite.
Yeah, right. I'm pretty bad with the names, but I think Hancock is one of the guys, and he has a terrible Wikipedia introduction with people hating him, writing about him. And the other guy, oh my god, I'm so bad with names. The other guy, yeah, he's called Carlson because he was on Tucker Carlson, so I remember the last name because they had the same last name. So he's kind of Randolph Carlson or whatever. He's kind of a geologist, I think. That's his expertise anyway. So both of these guys are different from the normal and mainstream archaeology. What do you call that? Archaeologists, uh, by way of not being focused in a narrow field like all professional scientists are very narrowly uh, experted, right? And people who dig in the earth to find relics from the past, they know nothing about comets and climate and floods and stuff. So their strength is that they are able and willing to combine knowledge from even from myths, the oldest epics of Gilgamesh and the oldest myths from different cultures in the world, which actually talk about these catastrophes, right? So it's kind of understandable why the mainstream is so reluctant from going into these things, because they just want to focus on their narrow field, right? And then these other generalists gonna come and just own everybody with their now finally backed up theories. And yeah, professional people just hate it when some of the fringe people come and take over the show.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's always these fixed narratives that we have, and I don't know. I feel like there's often there's more openness to new theories about how things played out in ancient deep time these days than ever before. But you're right. I mean, like, as Hugh often said, there's still that that classic, particularly the anthropological history of how civilization got started, and that's always done that whole side of things with C. Scott, the Against the Grain, and the whole Göbekli Tepe side of things. It's eye opening. It's great to try and look at that and think, well, clearly, like, the narrative we know it's never right. It's history is always is often written in a bias, or to suit a certain agenda. I mean, I even think, like, even fairly modern history about the stories we tell ourselves about even more recent history, like the Second World War, for example. I mean, how much has been written about that, and often it seems to me, from what you hear from many contrarian historians, that there's often a lot of bullshit written about that conflict and the Great War. To be honest, there's a lot of misunderstandings with those kind of things. So why on earth wouldn't there be with things that are even farther away from when we were existing in our modern form? It is interesting.
Yeah.
you tie those narratives to actual recorded stories, how we'll never know for sure, but things like the Bible and like the flood, all the floods and all those great things like that. I think there has been shown that there were clearly like huge floods. I mean, that was what Hughes' whole tipping theory was, the flippening. That kind of made sense to me. If that is really true, that whole flippening thing. Yeah, so it's fascinating.
Yeah, it reminds me, my girlfriend at one stage early in the 2000s, she told me she wanted to study history at university, and then I sat her down and had a very serious talk with her, and said like, "Do you know what history is? Do you know who writes history? Do you know how history teachers, have to repeat those lies that the other guys wrote?" And yeah, she started here studying something else at the university, basically. Because you're right, it's like you can't expect history about the past, even the war on terror, to be factually accurate, because there's nothing in it. There's no profit in factually accurate history for the people who are running the world right now, because they would rather be the heroes than the bad guys, right? And then
Yeah.
to the other thing you mentioned about who is threatened by this revelation about the 12,800 BC civilization collapse. That's obviously the world religions, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, maybe even Buddhism, and those kinds of things. All of those will naturally feel threatened by a new narrative about basically a big chunk of ice falling from the sky and fucking up everything, right? That's not really in the Bible. That's not really giving people any reason to pray or not steal the donkey of their neighbor or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's stories, isn't it? It's all stories. I mean, we, you know, um, it's it's often history often suits. Well, it's often written by the victors, isn't it? And it suits an agenda quite often. There's a lot of uncomfortable stuff that you probably don't ever read about. But then there's often, I guess, it's a great thing about the times we live in. There's so much resources that you can find these all sorts of people looking at different lenses on popular events or historical events. So I suppose, as usual, there's many different sources, but it's I don't know. Somewhere in there, there's probably a narrative of what is probably the truth, but then you'll never know for sure either. There's always, I don't know. So I feel like there's also there's stories that suit, how it's like now with this. I don't want to bring it up, but the war and things, and I think there's things that we just don't know. There's you know people seem very sure like how things will go, but we haven't had a war and again I apologize to bring it back to war, but that is usually what the most history gets written about, because it's about people fighting over things, and we don't know. We haven't had a war. Like I listened to there was a podcast with two young guys who were just into military history, and they were both saying, because a lot of people were saying, oh, this is this and this is that. Like that, people had facts on both sides about who was winning this war or where it was going and why one side were doing one thing. And they both said, look, nobody really knows, because there hasn't been a war at this scale in the 20, like this since the Second World War. But this is actually bigger than that, because they're using modern weapons in a conventional war sense. First time it's been done like this ever. So we don't know where this is going, and very difficult to say how it will pan out. And both sides are also figuring out how they're sizing each other up. And there's so many vectors and complexity to this. So,
Yeah, and I would even add that this war is also biological. We had the COVID virus thing, and even though it's not completely clear how that fits into the picture, if you are going to draw a picture of this situation as a world war, then it obviously fits in. A bioweapon will always be a part of the arsenal these days. You are not going to fight a war between the two biggest superpowers without using your full arsenal of, potentially at least nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. So, yeah, some people say that America shot themselves in the foot by being officially the biggest, having the biggest losses in terms of fatalities from the coup. And I must admit I have no idea how that fits into the war against Russia, other than that some people are suggesting that this war is not really against Russia, it's against us, normal people. So almost like in Orwell's 1984 novel, the government is fighting a war not against the other governments, but the governments, plural, are fighting a war against their people.
But is that really consciously deliberate? Is that not just I don't think it is. I don't think that we're like clever enough, but I think it's just a product of what happens when human organizations get big enough. They always just collapse. Like everything in nature, like Hughes always said, everything always sort of reverts back to the mean, so to speak. Things get to a point where they can't be sustainable anymore, and there is just a natural complex systems. There's always a collapse at some point, and things have to refresh. So I don't know, and that is just a natural thing. Like states get too big, they can't support things, but they always naturally revert to taking more power, which obviously starts affecting the population in adverse ways. We're not free. We're constantly being, constantly losing freedoms and things, that people willingly accept it because they don't know anything else and they just think it's for the better, for the greater good or something, some nonsense. But I don't know, it's quite a broad brush, but you get what I mean. I can't believe that there is a regime, no doubt, and there are people who are very powerful that need power, but I don't know if they are really winning so much. Like obviously they've won a lot during COVID. Those actors, Blair, the WEF, the various institutions and organisations that are very shadowy, they've taken a lot of gains, but they went quite far, and I don't think they're winning at the moment, particularly now with the situation with the war. I think nobody really knows. Yeah, it's a very dynamic situation. So it's ironic, but yeah, there's some maybe some
You're kind of dropping
benefits.
out.
I bet the apple cart.
You're kind of glitching here, so maybe I can add something in the meantime. yeah, I think technically, it's a good time to be an anarchist, because it's not very hard to find some fault with the governments, because that seems to be omnipresent or all over the place. But I think, at least from what I've seen on Twitter, who are going full truth these days, full what do Monty Python say? Full frontal nudity with the truth. Um, it seems that there's been
Yeah, I've seen that. Everyone says it's got worse. All of it suddenly was like they brought everyone back, didn't they? That was banned, but now the algorithm on the computer software has just made things completely like confusing. All of
yeah.
the people that have come back
I'm
have
not
said it's gone.
I'm not sure if that's right. I haven't noticed it, but I'm speaking about the Twitter files revelations and stuff, and it looks very much like a very concerted operations against the people of the West, where you have, with one hand you are creating the actual virus, if it's even a proper virus. It seems to be some kind of lipids, nano, whatever. I have no idea what that means. And with the other hand, and using some corporations, like in the old saying about a merger of state and corporate power, which is some kind of ideology that we won't mention here, but Mussolini was a big proponent of that ideology. So, with the other hand, you are creating the remedy, the medicine for this kind of creation that you got everybody infected with. And there are also future plans for creating other biological weapons, to do with Ebola and stuff, and then to make nations or national leaders pay some kind of insurance money, almost like a mob, a mafia type situation, where you go and smash everybody's windows and storefronts until they pay protection money, basically to the mafia gangs, right? So we're going into a very, very dystopian future. I don't think there is anything really to look forward to until the whole thing collapses from its own folly and idiocy. But I think we should still look happy at the larger situation, because we have the most powerful, mighty ally of everyone. We have Gaia, the living planet, on our side, and she is going to bring this circus down. Uh, Pretty sure. I'm sure. Anyway.
I agree. Yeah, it's that's that's what we can hope for. It's yeah, the weather events, these kind of natural forces, they're the things that are like on our side in terms of waking more people up and yeah, destroying the worst parts of our civilization, or if not, at least getting us to change our ways. Yeah, that's what we can hope for.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic, after watching these documentaries about the big civilization collapse 13,000 years ago, and we find ourselves, this whole community, this whole extinctionati thing is kind of about um, embracing our current collapse. Of course, that takes a little time to get used to, because in the one frame of the picture, it's kind of a terrible thing, and in the other frame, it's like the only hope that is left. But nobody said this particular era in world history would be easy for anyone. Certainly not me.
Yeah, it's yeah, crazy times. Unfortunately, my battery is literally about to go any second, so it was short and sweet, but we'll have to leave it, Torsten. But maybe we can pick it up at another point. And
Sure.
yeah,
And do you want me to do the thing with saying the stuff and things? I don't have a bell, but I can improvise.
yeah, go for it.
Okay. Um, Thank you everybody for coming, and we hope more people will come next Sunday. And for now, we just have to swim along with the current and be like a big or small or medium-sized jellyfish and just flow with the water. And we know nothing, and we forget everything very, very fast. And if you are working for the federal government, there's nothing here to come for. We are the good guys, and you guys obviously are the bad guys.
Yes, I support everything the government does. I'm a big supporter. And
Obviously.
good night. All the
Good
best.
night.
Bye for now.
Bye. Take care.